put your phone or device aside and immerse yourself in this audio story. Perfect for listening on the move, while relaxing, or for bedtime listening. We release new stories daily, so make sure to like and subscribe to not miss out. This story is based on true events. The Ghost in the Gallery. In the hushed corridors of the world's most prestigious museums, behind velvet ropes and bulletproof glass, hang paintings worth more than small nations. But what if I told you that some of the most celebrated masterpieces in those sacred halls, paintings that have been authenticated by the world's leading experts, insured for tens of millions, and worshipped by collectors, were created not in the studios of long-dead masters, but in the cramped apartment of a brilliant forger just a few years ago? This is the story of how one man infiltrated the highest echelons of the art world, fooled museums, dealers, and billionaires, and exposed a truth so unsettling it shook the foundations of a billion-dollar industry. That nobody, not the experts, not the institutions, not even the technology, can tell us with absolute certainty what is real. The art market operates in shadows. Unlike stocks or real estate, there's no central exchange, no transparent pricing, no regulatory oversight that can pierce through the layers of secrecy that shroud every transaction. Paintings change hands in private jets, Swiss bank vaults, and climate-controlled warehouses in free ports where they exist in legal limbo, never technically entering any country, never subject to taxes or scrutiny. The buyers are oligarchs, tech billionaires, and anonymous entities hiding behind shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. The sellers are galleries and auction houses that take commissions worth millions on a single sale. And somewhere in this murky ecosystem, where a single painting can sell for $450 million, there exists a parallel market, one built entirely on lies, operating with such sophistication that even the world's most powerful institutions cannot tell the difference between genius and fraud. Wolfgang Beltracchi should have been a nobody. Born in 1951 in a small German town, the son of a church painter and restorer, he showed artistic talent early, but never achieved the recognition he craved. His own paintings, created under his own name, attracted no attention, commanded no prices, generated no excitement in the art world that determines who matters and who doesn't. But Beltracchi possessed something more valuable than talent. He possessed the ability to disappear into the minds of dead artists, to channel their techniques, their brush strokes, their very souls onto canvas. And he possessed something even more dangerous. He understood that the art world's greatest weakness wasn't in the paintings themselves, but in the stories told about them. His method was devastatingly simple and impossibly complex. Beltracchi would study an artist obsessively, Max Ernst, Heinrich Campendonck, Fernand Léger, learning not just how they painted, but how they thought, how their style evolved, what subjects fascinated them during different periods of their lives. Then he would create paintings these artists could have painted, should have painted, but simply never got around to painting before death interrupted their work. He sourced canvases and frames from the correct historical periods, mixing his own paints using pigments that would pass scientific tests for age and composition. He studied old photographs of the artists' studios to recreate the exact lighting conditions under which they worked. He even artificially aged the paintings using vacuum chambers and careful exposure to controlled environments, creating decades of false history in weeks. But the real genius, the truly diabolical innovation, was in the provenance. In the art world, provenance is everything. The documented history of a painting's ownership, the paper trail that proves its authenticity, the pedigree that transforms canvas and pigment into liquid gold. Beltracchi and his wife Helene invented an entire collection that never existed, attributed to her fictional grandfather, Werner Jägers, supposedly a wealthy industrialist and art collector, who had amassed dozens of masterpieces before World War II. They created fake labels, fake exhibition catalogues, fake correspondence between their imaginary collector and the artists themselves. They seeded references to their fictional collection in obscure publications, building a false history so detailed and convincing that even the most meticulous researchers would find corroborating evidence of paintings that had never existed until Beltracchi created them in his studio. The scheme worked beyond anyone's wildest dreams or darkest nightmares, depending on whose perspective you take. For nearly 40 years, from the 1970s into the 2000s, Beltracchi flooded the market with forgeries. Not crude copies of famous works that any expert could spot, but entirely new creations by dead masters, undiscovered gems that filled gaps in artists' catalogues, answered questions art historians had pondered for decades, and commanded prices that made collectors salivate with desire. A Heinrich Campendonck sold for $2.9 million at auction. A supposed Max Ernst went for millions more. In total, Beltracchi would later claim to have created and sold over 300 forgeries, though the true number may never be known. Many likely still hang in museums and private collections, their true origins a secret that died with their authentication. The money flowed like champagne at a billionaire's yacht party. Beltracchi and his wife lived in luxury. Mediterranean villas, expensive cars, private parties with celebrities and art world insiders who had no idea they were socializing with the greatest art forger of the modern age. They moved through the elite circles of collectors and dealers, their fakes authenticated by the world's leading experts, exhibited in prestigious galleries, written about in scholarly journals. Every successful sale reinforced the legitimacy of the next. Every expert who authenticated a Beltracchi forgery became unwitting accomplice in establishing the provenance for others. The art world, built on trust and reputation, on the authority of experts and institutions, had become complicit in its own deception. But here's where the story takes its first truly chilling turn, one that reveals something far darker about the art market than simple fraud. As Beltracchi's forgeries spread through the market, they didn't just fool individual collectors or dealers. They fooled everyone. Leading auction houses authenticated them. Museums displayed them. Art historians wrote scholarly papers analyzing them, incorporating Beltracchi's inventions into the canonical understanding of artists' work and development. In 1992, a painting Beltracchi attributed to Max Ernst was featured in a major retrospective exhibition, not as a curiosity or a question mark, but as an authentic masterpiece that contributed to our understanding of the artist's evolution. The forgery had become real through the act of belief, transforming from criminal deception into accepted truth through nothing more than the authority of experts who were supposed to know better. This is the uncomfortable reality Beltracchi's success exposed. Authentication in the art world is not science, it's theater. Yes, there are technical tests that can detect anachronistic materials, reveal layers beneath the surface, analyze pigment composition. But these tests only tell you what a painting is made of, not who made it. The final determination of authenticity rests on connoisseurship, the supposedly expert eye that can discern the authentic touch of a master from the work of a copyist. But what Beltracchi proved is that connoisseurship is often nothing more than confident storytelling, expertise that crumbles when faced with a forgery, good enough to match every technical criterion and every aesthetic expectation. The emperor, it turned out, had no clothes, and nobody wanted to admit they couldn't see the fabric. For decades, the scheme seemed invincible. Beltracchi had perfected his craft to such a degree that detection seemed impossible. But perfection, as every criminal eventually learns, requires maintaining an impossible standard forever, and forever is a very long time. The mistake, when it came, was almost laughably small. the kind of detail that demonstrates how thin the line between masterful success and catastrophic failure truly is. In 2006, Beltracchi created what he believed was a perfect Heinrich Campendonck painting, titled Rotes Bild mit Pferden, or Red Picture with Horses. Every detail was immaculate: the style, the composition, the aging, the provenance from the fictional Jäger's collection. The painting sold through a reputable dealer, and eventually ended up in the hands of a collector who, in 2008, decided to have it thoroughly tested before donating it to a museum. The scientific analysis began routinely enough. X-ray fluorescence to analyze the pigment composition, standard procedure for any valuable artwork. The results should have matched the materials available in 1914, when Campendonck supposedly created the work. Instead, the tests revealed titanium white, a pigment that wasn't used in artistic paint until decades after Campendonck's supposed creation of the painting. It was a single element, a trace amount of the wrong pigment, but it was enough. That one microscopic mistake, using a pre-mixed tube of white paint instead of mixing his own pigments from scratch as he usually did, brought down an empire built on 4 decades of perfect deception. Once investigators knew where to look, the house of cards began to collapse. Other paintings from the Jäger's collection were tested and failed. The provenance was examined more closely, revealing inconsistencies and impossibilities in the documented history. In 2010, German police arrested Wolfgang and Helene Beltracchi in a dawn raid that ended their life of luxury and launched one of the most extensive art fraud investigations in history. The trial that followed was a media sensation, revealing the scope of their scheme and forcing the art world to confront uncomfortable truths about its own complicity in what had been allowed to happen. In 2011, Wolfgang Beltracchi was convicted of forgery and sentenced to 6 years in prison, though he would serve only 4 before being released on parole. His wife, Helene, received a shorter sentence for her role in creating the false provenance. The court estimated their earnings from the scheme at approximately $45 million, though the true figure is likely much higher. Most of their assets had been carefully hidden in offshore accounts and shell companies, insulated from prosecution by the same financial secrecy that protects legitimate art market transactions. But the financial losses extended far beyond what Beltracchi had personally gained. Collectors who had paid millions for paintings that were now worthless filed lawsuits against dealers and auction houses. Insurance companies faced massive claims. Galleries that had authenticated and sold Beltracchi's work saw their reputations destroyed. The total damage to the art market, in money, credibility, and trust, likely exceeded $500 million. But here's the second devastating revelation, the twist that transforms this from a simple story of crime and punishment into something far more unsettling about power, wealth, and the nature of value itself. After his conviction and imprisonment, as investigators tried to identify which paintings in museums and private collections were Beltracchi forgeries, a strange resistance emerged. Museums refused to test paintings. Private collectors declined to have their works authenticated. Galleries that had sold paintings from the Jäger's collection fought against investigations that might expose additional forgeries. Why? Because the art world had discovered something terrifying. The truth was more dangerous than the lie. A painting authenticated as a Max Ernst is worth millions. The same painting revealed as a Beltracchi forgery is worthless, even though nothing about the physical object has changed, even though it hangs on the same wall in the same frame, even though it provides exactly the same aesthetic pleasure to anyone viewing it. The value exists not in the canvas and paint, but in the story told about the canvas and paint. And once that story is challenged, once doubt enters the equation, the entire system of value creation begins to crumble. Museums that discovered Beltracchi forgeries in their collections faced a terrible choice: admit they had been fooled and watch the value of their entire holdings come under suspicion, or simply keep quiet and hope nobody looked too closely. Many chose silence. The scandal revealed fractures in the art market that go far beyond one forger's criminal enterprise. It exposed how authentication itself is often a rubber stamp, with experts reluctant to challenge the provenance of valuable works because doing so threatens their relationships with wealthy collectors and powerful galleries. It showed how auction houses have financial incentives to accept questionable works. They earn commissions whether a painting is real or fake, and turning away potential millions in sales requires a level of ethical commitment that conflicts with profit maximization. It demonstrated how the lack of transparency in the art market, the same secrecy that protects billionaire collectors from taxes and public scrutiny, also provides perfect cover for fraud on an industrial scale. And Beltracchi himself? After his release from prison in 2013, he became a celebrity, a notorious figure whose very notoriety became a kind of twisted authentication. He published a memoir that became a bestseller in Germany. He gave interviews and appeared in documentaries, explaining his techniques and defending his actions as the work of a creative artist rather than a mere forger. Most remarkably, he began painting again, this time openly under his own name, creating works in the style of famous artists and selling them for tens of thousands of dollars to collectors fascinated by his story. The forger had become legitimate through the simple act of acknowledgement. His criminality transformed into cultural capital. His fakes now valuable precisely because everyone knows they're fake and knows who made them. But the story doesn't end with Beltracchi's redemption arc or the art world's uncomfortable revelations about authentication and value. Because Beltracchi was never alone. He was simply the one who got caught. Art forgery is not an isolated criminal activity carried out by a handful of talented painters with flexible ethics. It is a systematic feature of a market built on secrecy, subjective valuation, and the concentration of enormous wealth in the hands of people who treat art as investment vehicles rather than cultural treasures. Experts estimate that at any given time, somewhere between 20 and 40% of artworks on the market are either outright forgeries or have some form of false attribution. Paintings claimed to be by famous artists that were actually created by their students. Works with fabricated provenance. Discoveries that miraculously appear whenever market demand for a particular artist's work exceeds supply. Consider the case of Pei Shen-qian, a Chinese immigrant living in New York who spent 15 years creating perfect forgeries of abstract expressionist paintings, works supposedly by masters like Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, and Mark Rothko, that were sold through a respected Manhattan gallery for more than $80 million before the scheme collapsed in 2013. Or Sean Greenhalgh, a British forger who fooled museums and collectors for 17 years with everything from ancient sculptures to 20th century paintings, causing losses estimated at over $16 million. Or John Drew, who broke into museum archives to insert false provenance documents for forged paintings, literally rewriting art history to accommodate fraud. These are just the ones who were caught, prosecuted, their schemes exposed to public scrutiny. How many others remain undetected, their forgeries hanging in museums, appreciating in value in climate-controlled vaults, sold and resold at auction, while everyone involved remains blissfully ignorant of the truth? The billion-dollar question, and it is literally a question worth billions, is why the art market allows this to continue. The technology exists to detect many forgeries. Scientific analysis can reveal anachronistic materials. Digital imaging can detect inconsistencies invisible to the naked eye. Databases could track provenance and flag suspicious patterns. But implementation of these safeguards remains sporadic, voluntary, easily circumvented by anyone with sufficient motivation and resources. The reason is simple and sinister. Transparency is the enemy of profit in the art market. Mandatory scientific testing would reveal uncomfortable truths about works already sold, already hanging in prestigious collections, already serving as the foundation for price levels throughout the market. It would expose the degree to which value in the art world is based not on objective criteria, but on collective belief, on the shared agreement among wealthy collectors, prestigious institutions, and powerful dealers that certain objects are worth certain amounts, an agreement that collapses the moment anyone looks too closely at the underlying assumptions. This is the real scandal Beltracchi's case exposed. Not that one man could fool the experts, but that the entire system is designed to be fooled. The art market operates as a confidence game in the most literal sense. Its continued function requires confidence from all participants that the system works, that experts can be trusted, that authentication means something, that a painting labeled with a famous name is actually by that artist. But confidence, once shaken, is difficult to restore, and so the market chooses willful blindness over uncomfortable revelation, preferring the pretty lie to the ugly truth, because the truth threatens billions in asset values and centuries of institutional credibility. The mechanics of art forgery mirror the mechanics of legitimate art market operations in disturbing ways. Both rely on storytelling, the creation of narrative around objects that transforms them from mere things into vessels of meaning and value. Both depend on artificial scarcity, on the idea that certain objects are uniquely valuable because they are rare and cannot be replicated. Both operate in shadows, through private transactions between parties who have strong incentives to avoid transparency and public scrutiny. The difference between a forger and a dealer is often simply a matter of honesty about what story is being told. Both are selling objects, whose value derives almost entirely from belief rather than any intrinsic quality. Consider what happens when a lost Caravaggio is discovered in an attic, authenticated by experts, and sold for tens of millions of dollars. The paint and canvas are worth perhaps a few $100s. The artistic skill required to create the painting, while considerable, is shared by many living artists who struggle to sell their work for a fraction of that amount. What's being sold is not really the physical object, but the story attached to it. That this canvas was touched by the hand of a master 400 years ago. That it carries within it some spark of genius that cannot be replicated. That owning it connects the buyer to history and greatness and cultural significance. But if that story is false, if the painting is actually by a talented contemporary forger rather than by Caravaggio, then the object loses virtually all its value, even though nothing about its physical or aesthetic properties has changed. The value was always in the story, never in the thing itself. This realization has profound implications for understanding wealth and value in modern capitalism. The art market is not unique in its dependence on narrative and belief rather than tangible fundamentals. It's simply more honest about it than most markets. Cryptocurrency, luxury goods, collectibles of all kinds operate on similar principles. Value is created through storytelling, through the construction of scarcity, through the cultivation of desire among people who have more money than they know what to do with and are searching for ways to convert their wealth into status and meaning. The forger's crime is not creating a beautiful object that provides aesthetic pleasure. It's creating a beautiful object while telling the wrong story about where it came from, violating the agreed-upon rules of a game built on agreed-upon fictions. The legal and ethical dimensions of art forgery raise questions that extend far beyond the art world. When Beltracchi created a painting by Heinrich Campendonck that was indistinguishable from an authentic Campendonck, that fooled every expert who examined it, that provided pleasure to everyone who viewed it, what exactly was the harm? Yes, collectors paid money for something they believed was authentic, and received something fake. That's fraud in any conventional sense. But if the fake provides exactly the same aesthetic experience as the authentic work would have provided, if it's displayed in exactly the same way, and appreciated in exactly the same way, then the only thing missing is the story. And how much should we really value a story compared to the actual experience of the object itself? Beltracchi himself has argued that his work represents a form of artistic creation rather than mere copying, that he was channeling the spirits of dead artists and creating works they would have created if they had lived longer or explored different directions. It's a self-serving argument, obviously, one designed to minimize the criminal nature of his actions and elevate his status from forger to artist. But it touches on real ambiguities in how we think about artistic value and authenticity. If a painting perfectly captures the style, technique, and aesthetic vision of a famous artist, if it could have come from that artist's hand, and might as well have come from that artist's hand, then what is really lost by the deception, except the collector's sense of certainty about what they own? The answer, of course, is that what's lost is the foundation of trust that allows the art market to function as a vehicle for wealth storage and transfer. Billionaires and oligarchs don't buy paintings primarily for aesthetic pleasure. They buy them as investments, as portable stores of value that can be moved across borders, hidden from tax authorities, used as collateral for loans, and sold when cash is needed. Art serves functions in the global economy of the ultra-wealthy that have nothing to do with beauty or cultural significance, and everything to do with the unique combination of high value, physical portability, and market opacity that makes it perfect for both legitimate wealth management and money laundering. Forgery threatens these functions by introducing uncertainty into valuations, by making it impossible to trust that the $50 million painting in your Geneva vault is actually worth $50 million. This is why the art market's response to Beltracchi and other major forgers has been so muted, so reluctant to implement the safeguards that would prevent future fraud. Comprehensive authentication would require transparency that conflicts with the market's primary functions for wealthy clients. It would require revealing the true origins and ownership history of artworks, information that buyers and sellers go to great lengths to conceal. It would require admitting that expert opinion is often worthless, that the emperors of the art world wear no clothes, that the entire system of valuation rests on foundations far more fragile than anyone wants to acknowledge. Better to catch the occasional forger when they make a mistake, make a public example of them, and then return to business as usual, accepting that some unknown percentage of the market is fraudulent as simply a cost of maintaining the system's other benefits. The human psychology behind art forgery's success reveals uncomfortable truths about expertise and certainty in all domains. Studies have shown that experts viewing the same artwork will reach different conclusions about authenticity depending on what they've been told about its provenance. That auction prices for identical objects vary wildly based on the stories told about them. That the experience of viewing art is fundamentally shaped by preconception and expectation rather than pure aesthetic response. We want to believe that experts can reliably distinguish real from fake, authentic from fraudulent, genius from mere competence. But Beltracchi proved that expertise is often just confident ignorance, that the trappings of authority, prestigious credentials, scholarly publications, institutional positions, can disguise an inability to actually do what experts claim they can do. This should concern us far beyond the art market, because we rely on expert authority in domains where the stakes are much higher than whether a painting is authentic. Financial analysts claim to be able to value companies and predict market movements. Medical experts claim to be able to diagnose diseases and recommend treatments. Political pundits claim to be able to explain events and forecast outcomes. But if art experts, people who devote their entire careers to studying the work of specific artists, can be comprehensively fooled by a talented forger. What does that tell us about the reliability of expertise in fields where the underlying phenomena are far more complex and less amenable to study than a painting hanging motionless on a wall? The economics of art forgery offer lessons about risk, reward, and the rational criminal enterprise. Beltracchi spent 40 years creating forgeries before being caught, earning tens of millions of dollars and enjoying a lifestyle of luxury and respect. When caught, he served 4 years in prison, a relatively light sentence given the scale of his fraud, and emerged as a celebrity whose notoriety became a new revenue stream. From a purely rational calculation perspective, the forgery paid off handsomely, even accounting for the eventual punishment. This creates perverse incentives. Talented artists who struggle to sell their own work under their own names can earn far more by creating forgeries. And even if eventually caught, the punishment is unlikely to outweigh decades of profitable crime. The concentration of wealth in fewer hands globally has supercharged the art market and, inevitably, the forgery market alongside it. As billionaires multiply and seek places to park their money, as wealth inequality reaches levels not seen since the Gilded Age, the demand for trophy assets like art has exploded. Prices for works by blue-chip artists have increased exponentially. A Basquiat that sold for $20,000 in the 1980s fetches over $100 million today. This creates enormous incentive for fraud. The potential rewards for successfully passing off a forgery have never been higher, while the punishments remain light and the probability of detection remains low. Every major art market boom in history has been accompanied by a forgery boom, as criminal enterprises scale up to meet the demand that legitimate supply cannot satisfy. Technology has become both weapon and shield in the arms race between forgers and authenticators. Modern forgers use advanced techniques to age their works artificially, employ chemical analysis to ensure their pigments match historical periods, even study the specific patterns of craquelure, the fine network of cracks that appears in aging paintings, to reproduce it convincingly. Meanwhile, authentication has developed increasingly sophisticated tools. Radiocarbon dating can establish the age of organic materials in paintings. Infrared imaging can reveal underlying sketches and corrections. X-ray fluorescence can identify pigments and materials. But technology is only as useful as the willingness to deploy it, and the art market's reluctance to subject valuable works to invasive testing means many forgeries remain undetected simply because nobody looks closely enough to find them. The psychological toll of the Beltracchi scandal on its victims reveals the emotional dimensions of fraud that extend beyond financial loss. Collectors who paid millions for paintings they believed were authentic masterpieces didn't just lose money when the forgeries were exposed. They lost their connection to history, their pride in owning something touched by genius, their status as discerning connoisseurs. Museum curators who had authenticated and exhibited Beltracchi's work faced professional disgrace, the destruction of reputations built over decades of scholarship. The forgery transformed their expertise from authority into embarrassment, their confidence into the butt of cruel jokes about the emperor's clothes. This emotional damage helps explain the art world's reluctance to seek out forgeries aggressively. Better not to know than to face the shame of having been fooled. Today, more than a decade after Beltracchi's arrest, the art market continues to struggle with questions of authenticity and value that his case forced into the open. Some institutions have implemented more rigorous authentication protocols, requiring scientific testing alongside connoisseurship. Others have doubled down on traditional methods, arguing that technology cannot replace the trained eye of the expert who has spent decades studying an artist's work. But the fundamental tension remains unresolved. The market needs certainty to function efficiently, but certainty requires transparency that conflicts with the secrecy wealthy participants demand. And so the art world continues its dance of willful blindness, accepting that some unknown percentage of its trillion-dollar market consists of skillful lies, because the alternative, actually finding out how much is fake, would be too devastating to contemplate. The lesson of the billion-dollar forgery market is not simply that fraud exists, or that people can be fooled. That's true in any market, any human endeavor. The real lesson is about the construction of value in systems built on belief rather than fundamentals, about how wealth creates opportunities for exploitation, about how institutions tasked with protecting truth can become complicit in maintaining profitable lies. Wolfgang Beltracchi didn't just forge paintings, he exposed the forgery at the heart of the art market itself, the collective fiction that expert authority and institutional credibility can guarantee authenticity, that value inheres in objects rather than in the stories told about them. And here's the final, most unsettling truth. Beltracchi's forgeries didn't stop being beautiful when they were revealed as fakes. The paintings he created still demonstrate remarkable technical skill, still evoke emotional responses, still function as aesthetic objects, in exactly the way they did when everyone believed they were authentic works by famous masters. The only thing that changed was the story, and that story was enough to transform objects worth millions into worthless curiosities, to bankrupt collectors and destroy careers, to send shockwaves through a trillion-dollar market. Because in the end, in the highest echelons of the art world, where wealth is concentrated and power is absolute, the story is all that matters. And as long as that remains true, as long as value is created through narrative rather than inherent worth, forgers will find ways to tell better stories than the truth. The museums still won't test their collections. The collectors still won't allow authentication that might reveal inconvenient truths. And somewhere, right now, a talented artist who can't sell their own work is mixing pigments, studying old photographs, and creating masterpieces by dead artists that will fool every expert who examines them. Because the market demands it, the profits justify the risk. And the art world has learned that sometimes the most valuable thing you can possess is the willingness not to look too closely at what hangs on your walls. Subscribe and listen to our next story below.